Hello and welcome to my review of Mr. Miracle issue number 6, written by Tom King and drawn by Mitch Gerads. Received a score on Comic Book Roundup from critics 9.1 and from users 8.8. And here's the plot summary, courtesy of Comic Book Roundup. The hit miniseries reaches the emotional conclusion of its first arc. Scott-free returns to New Genesis to face his punishment, but instead finds the whole world has been flipped upside down. Mr. Miracle and Big Barda battle their way through monsters and new gods to get to the High Father. But once they reach Orion's throne room, they learn that the war against Darkseid has taken a bloody turn. And now I'm going to try something I've only recently begun doing, and that is I'm going to read 2 comments from critics about this issue and see in what ways they correspond, their thoughts correspond with mine, in what ways they contradict, and maybe they bring up things I hadn't even thought about. So, the first one is from the critic C.K. Stewart, writing on Newsrama. King has crafted a thoughtful, emotional look at trauma and recovery that embraces the idea that there's no universal panacea for troubled childhoods, except, perhaps, the devotion of a found family that lets you find yourself without leaving you adrift. And here I imagine King is referring to not only Big Barda, but also Oberon, who has passed away, and the child that gets referred to at the end of the issue. And then, on Comicosity, Chris C. Hernandez writes, throughout life, evil in some form continues to be present, threatening to consume everything, whether it's corrupt governments, men without morals, or senseless murderers. We just can't escape it. As much as we struggle to escape like scot-free, impending doom will always be present with us. And that refers to the idea that Darkseid isn't just a malevolent figure, he's a malevolent force. The worst aspect of Darkseid isn't the physical violence that he can do through his form, his body. It's the way that we can do violence to ourselves while under the influence of Darkseid without realizing we're under the influence of Darkseid. And it's not just personal, it also extends to governments and the organizations that we turn to, put our trust in. And in some ways that corresponds with Jack Kirby's own interests following his involvement in World War II. Many of the comic books afterwards, you can see he returns the idea of a strong man, reminiscent of the leaders of Germany or Italy, Hitler or Mussolini, endangering the lives of citizens and corrupting countries. Dr. Doom in Fantastic Four, when he takes over that country, I can't remember the name of the country, I won't try guessing it, but when he becomes the ruler of his own country, the not quite benign dictator, that's King again getting at the idea that fascism is still an evil force in the world and something we must be vigilant against, because it not only ruins the lives of a few people, it ruins the lives of the whole government, and in extension corrupts good people into doing bad things. And then Hernandez continues, Scott has Barda. Though Scott is stuck with the anti-life equation, he is choosing now to live through it with the help of Barda, so Barda becomes his balance. And we see that in this issue, we'll get to that in a second, where Scott feels pessimistic, Barda feels hopeful. And then in Balance, where Scott sees love, Barda sees hate. So they're able to balance each other. So now let's turn to the writing. About the writing in this issue, Tom King, pardon me, there's something up with my voice. I'm not sure if I'm coming down with a cold or what's going on, but you can tell my voice is really thin and keeps breaking. So I'll do my best, but please forgive me for not getting the volume the way I would like it tonight. The writing goes on 2 tracks, and one we have this sort of inane Seinfeld conversation about anything, and on the other we have a background of combat. And whereas before in issue 4, where he was doing form and function together, which I had problems with, here, I'm sorry, form and content. We talked about how a story about boring people doesn't need to be boring. It's the fallacy of imitative form. But Tom King was doing them together. He was doing the imitative form. So if there was boring people, it's a boring story. But here it's the opposite. He's using contrast. So while we have Barda and Mr. Miracle arguing about the arrangement of their apartment and redecorating, at the same time they're kicking butt and taking names. And so there's a tension between the two about why are they having this conversation. There's a subtext that's built. And while if we had just seen them speaking in the living room, this conversation would be kind of boring for the reader, because Tom King contrasts that speech with high stakes because their lives could be lost at any moment if they lose this combat. There's tension throughout the scene where maybe it'll be a little slack. And so I'm going to read the first page to demonstrate this. This is going to require me trying to do a little bit of a high wire act. I'm going to try to get this in front of you in focus. Okay, dual pixel working well. And then I'm going to try to read it on my computer screen at the same time, because I have my own copy from Comixology. And then I'm going to try to turn the page using my fingers. So, like I said, sort of a high wire act. So let's get it. Oops, that was unintentional. Okay, we'll start there. So how are we going to do this? Like this? All right. So we're going to go this way. Okay. There we go. But I love both of them. Oh, stop. Boom. Mr. Miracle? Look at the kitchen. We don't need that much kitchen. Mr. Miracle, by the order of High Father, you are to kneel and prepare for execution. I know we said we cook. My head was going well. Do you? Huh? But we don't. This way? Yes. Ugh, ugh. I think it's been long enough and we need to accept who we are. We're not going to take night classes on soufflés. I can barely do an omelet. I like your omelet. Well, I can make the omelet in a smaller kitchen. Oops. Dual pixel autofocus. Bring us in. We have all that stuff on the front counter. If that's not there, where does that go? And it continues on in that vein. And each conversation is contrasted with an escalating combat, and it follows a similar structure. There's a warning, and then there's the fight, and then Mr. Miracle and Barda win until they get to fighting Light Ray. So the climax is in, well, while this is going on, as I mentioned before, there are also two themes going on, and that's Barda rescuing Scott free and Scott rescuing Barda. And Barda rescues Scott free through her child, their child, because he's got that anti-life equation within him. He feels very depressed, and it's easy for him to let that anti-life within him win. But when Barda tells him about the child, he has a reason for life again. There's hope in his life. And then he rescues Barda because Barda's never had true love. She's never felt true love. It's always been misinterpreted, where actions of hate to her were meant to be signified as love, because Granny Goodness was all effed up. She'd do terrible things to them, say, oh, I love you. So she learned the wrong way about what love is. She learned the negative impulses. But because Scott Free had spent part of his childhood on New Genesis, he did know the difference between love and not love, even if he gets confused by Granny Goodness. Because he knows what love is, he can rescue Big Barda through action. He can demonstrate what love is through action. So in that way, they complement each other and help each other. And now let's get into the art from Mitch Gerads. Next, I want to talk about the art from Mitch Gerads. And Mitch Gerads had an interesting challenge in this issue because there's a lot of redundant action, and there's also a lot of different scene changes which would require the author to fill in the background so the reader can feel like they're in that scene. Usually you have to establish the scene, and then after you establish the scene with all the background detail, you can use close-ups and even just blank out the background as long as the scene has been established with a master shot, what they call in the film world. But because there are so many scene changes, in comic books you have a problem that you don't have in movies, but you do in animated films, and that's pencil time. The time that the artist has to spend with the pencil just drawing everything out. So he uses color, he flattens out a lot of the background and uses color and form to convey information that is the information that's missing. So take a look at this page where he uses a color, green, blue, purple. I imagine those are like the flashing lights, the emergency lights. But he uses that color to convey change in the scene or convey information that's missing because the background is just so monotone. Then on the next page, he uses form. He shrinks down the panels. The 9-panel grid becomes very small because they're crawling through air vents. And then he uses the color, the red, for the warning lights to introduce a little variety to it. And then here, when they break through the vents, you can see that the 9-panel grid kind of takes over again. And then finally, the fight with Light Ray, he uses the primary colors of Mr. Miracle and Orion like he did in issue 3, or is it issue 4? I can't remember where the fight was. But he puts them in the background mural, which is quite interesting. But look, take a look here at this mural. See these colors, how muted they are? But they are the yellow, red, and green. And it's also what he did in the first fight, but he used their capes and their costumes. You can't quite see what I mean. That mural in the back, you can just barely make out that green and the yellow and the green, yellow, and some pink there, but it's the color of the outfits for Mr. Miracle and Orion. He puts it in the mural. And then, again, this last page, that yellow background, it's the color of Mr. Miracle. And he uses that because the next page, we get a shocker. And so I have to bring up the comicsology. But he goes in to the throne room and he finds the body of Orion, and Darkseid is there. And in those two panels, the color schema completely changes. So it gives us the feeling that something substantial has changed. Okay, so I started my comicsology. A little bit of trivia. The reason why I had to switch, I have 2 copies. I've got one from Amazon, ebook from Amazon, and then one from comicsology. And the one from Amazon is missing the last 2 pages. And sometimes they change things on Amazon. They'll update them. There was even a story where the author got caught up in the Me Too movement, and so they removed it a couple days after the issue was released. In this case, those last 2 issues, Amazon never replaced them. The first time I read the issue, I didn't see the last 2 pages, and here it ends kind of hopefully. I had no idea of the change that happens in the last 2 pages until I saw a review where they discussed these last 2 pages. But see how the color scheme changes to purple to give you the idea that we are in a different, there's a whole different mood. So something significant's about to happen. And that's because Mr. Miracle comes in to find Orion has already been dealt with, been killed. And now Mr. Miracle claims he has seen the face of God, so we have to wonder what kind of corruption Darkseid has placed on him. And that was conveyed a large part through the color schemes that the artist used in the last 2 pages. And now I want to go over two more words, 2 more, this time locations, not characters, from the New Gods. So first let's go over New Genesis. New Genesis was created by Jack Kirby in New Gods #1. The planet of New Genesis is in a parallel dimension that's adjacent to the main DC universe. It is the home planet of the new gods and can only be accessed by using a boom tube. New Genesis and Apocalypse were spawned by the destruction of Urgrund, the world of the old gods. New Genesis is ruled by a being known as High Father, a spiritual leader who maintains his people's connection to the primal energy field known as the Source. My voice is starting to go. Okay, and then let's talk about Apocalypse. Apocalypse is the dark opposite of New Genesis. It is ruled by a dark side. The whole planet is covered by one city, and it is a waste pit of industrial power stations, pollution, elite guard fortresses, prisons, and many of its inhabitants were captured from other planets, tortured, and then forced into slavery to work for the rest of their lives on Apocalypse. So pretty much a hellhole, otherwise known as New Jersey. No insult to New Jersey, it's just a joke. Just picked any place at random. Okay, so that's it for this review of issue 6. I hope you'll join me again soon for my review of issue 7. That's all for now. Take care and be well. Dark side is.